Good morning, it's 10 to 8. Now, more than 50 doctors are calling on MPs to vote for Kim Leadbister's assisted dying bill, claiming blanket prohibition is cruel. Among the backers are former heads of the British Medical Association, the Royal College of Nursing, and the Royal College of Surgeons. Dr. David Nicholl is a neurologist, human rights activist, and columnist who spent much of his career in opposition to assisted dying, but has also signed this letter. Dr. Nicholl, David, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to speak to you. Why have you changed your mind?
When I say changed my mind, I mean I've been married 30 years, and for a significant period of that time I couldn't actually talk about the subject with my wife because she was very pro-assisted dying, and I was completely against. I was in fact on the Royal Court Physicians Council in 2015 when we had a survey opposing assisted dying, and it's now moved to neutral. But then in 2017, a childhood friend who I went to school with, Fabi, who's from Belgium, she died through euthanasia in Belgium, and she completely changed my mind, and it just made me rethink why was I opposed previously, and that was because I had always was of the impression that if the only reason people want assisted dying was the lack of palliative care. And in fact, what I found in Belgium, the palliative care system was fantastic. And even then, and that is still true, is that there are situations where actually palliative care is not enough. And fundamentally, this bill is about respecting the views of a proportion of terminally ill people for which palliative care is just not enough.
Which in itself is quite depressing as a thought, isn't it? That we can't provide for these people.
Oh, no, I turn it around, actually, because this is actually about respecting the wishes of some where there are no other options, where you are terminally ill, so actually you are going to die, but it is respecting a wish to die on their terms, and a quality of life. So in Fabi's case, she was able to say goodbye to her family that morning. And obviously it's a different situation in Belgium, so the doctor was directly able to be involved in her death. Basically, in fact, it was her own GP that had known her for years, and she basically had a rare tumour syndrome, which she'd been dealing with for many decades, actually.
Yeah. What do you say about the significance of an intervention from somebody like yourself in this debate, a medical doctor, traditionally bound by the Hippocratic Oath, as is often referred to, first do no harm. And I just wonder if actually people are going to struggle to get their heads around the idea of a doctor advocating for dying.
No, I'm not saying I'm not a pro-death doctor. I'm a pro-quality of a pro-quality of life, and pro understanding there are situations where whatever palliative care you've got will never be enough. And indeed, I was at the launch of Kim Leadbister's bill in Parliament last week, and it really struck me actually meeting Max Hill, former Director of Public Prosecution, and bear in mind 3 Directors of Public Prosecution, so that's head of the Crown Prosecution Service for 15 years. They've had to deal with a current situation which is not fit for purpose. These people that go off to Dignitas, and then have to investigate the relatives. Did they support them, under the Suicide Act, and potentially face criminal sanction, which is just bonkers. I can't think of a worse job as a lawyer than trying to investigate these cases, and that's a reality of the situation that we have today. And going up to the Supreme Court have said this is a decision that has to be made by Parliament. So this is a once in a generation chance to review the law and think about these cases and learn from the experience of other legislations and actually introduce the best and most safe and robust legislation in the world, actually. And I have to say, I've got a copy of the legislation in front of me. I'm very impressed with the way in which the authors have drafted this. They're very important sanctions, actually, for people who don't follow the law.
Yeah. I suppose there's something to be considered in even just this conversation, doctors speaking in this way. Is there a chance of an erosion of a boundary, I suppose, insofar as people will become aware of doctors who have the same position as you, David, and that may mean that groups who are or people who are looking for somebody to sign off on their death will coalesce around doctors who they know have been publicly in support of it.
I don't think so, actually, and I would actually encourage critics to actually read the legislation. You know, some of the discussion has been, from disability groups, for example, okay, and there is nothing in this legislation that will lead to people who were disabled being put through assisted dying unless they have a terminal illness, okay? So, and why should someone who's got a disability, who's terminally ill, be prejudiced against someone who's non-disabled? So I would encourage people to read the legislation. And I think if you're perceived as some kind of soft touch, I can see what will happen is actually under section 27 of this legislation. If you produce falsification of documentation, you could potentially have a criminal sentence. So actually there are very important protections within this legislation. So that's why I would encourage all MPs to read it. It's 38 pages long. Again, there's been much of a hullabaloo that we haven't had time about this. We've been debating this for decades.
Does it feel to you like this is the right cohort of MPs to act on this issue on behalf of the public at large?
I do, and I would listen to the constituency because, in fact, the majority of the public in constituency support a change in the law. Judges are calling for Parliament to look at this. If the front page of The Economist today is saying, now is the time, I urge MPs to listen to their constituents. I totally appreciate there will be a range of views, and the range of views within doctors. I've got friends, I can think of a very good friend of mine who actually died at Easter, who had metastatic cancer, who would be disagreeing with me vehemently because she was very religious. This is not about forcing anyone, it's about respecting the views of some terminally ill people, that actually palliative care is not enough.
Yeah. Dr. Nicholl, thank you. Thank you for your insights. Good to speak to you this morning.
Thank you.
That is Dr. David Nicholl, neurologist, human rights activist, columnist as well. I think actually on Dr. Nicholl's point around debate, one thing that we're determined to do on this programme is to keep discussing the issue of assisted dying because it is important and it's something that everyone I think is wrestling with, particularly MPs, of course, as they come up to that vote. So we will keep talking about it here and giving you a space to talk about it, to ask your questions, to put your challenges, your